cough echoed through the hostel's common room like a gunshot. All eyes turned to the pale, sweating man hunched over in the corner. Little did we know that single cough would trap us in a nightmare none of us could have imagined. I'd only been in Bangkok for 3 days, my first stop on what was supposed to be a 6-month backpacking trip through Southeast Asia. The Sukhumvit Sunshine Hostel had decent reviews online, and at just $8 a night. The price was right for my tight budget. That evening, I'd been sharing travel stories with a group of other backpackers in the common room. There was Emma, an Australian taking a gap year before university. Raj, an Indian software developer on a much-needed vacation. And Chun, a soft-spoken photographer from Singapore. We were swapping tips on the best street food stalls and debating whether to book a group tour to the floating markets when we heard it. That awful hacking cough. The man in the corner looked terrible. His skin had a grayish tinge. And even from across the room, I could see he was shaking. Emma, always the mother hen of any group, stood up to check on him. "Sir, are you all right? Can we get you some water or something?" He tried to respond but was overtaken by another coughing fit. This time, I saw flecks of red spray from his mouth. Blood. Everything happened quickly after that. Someone called for an ambulance. The hostel staff ushered us away from the man, their faces tight with worry. Within 20 minutes, paramedics in hazmat suits rushed in, whisking the sick man away on a stretcher. We all breathed a collective sigh of relief, thinking the excitement was over. How wrong we were. Less than an hour later, a team of government health officials arrived. They gathered us all in the common room, guests and staff alike. A stern-faced woman in a crisp white coat addressed us in accented English. The man who was taken ill is suspected of having a highly contagious and dangerous virus. As a precautionary measure, this hostel is now under quarantine. No one may enter or leave until we have determined it is safe to do so. The room erupted in a cacophony of shouts and questions. How long would we be here? What about our flights? Our jobs? Our families? The official raised her hand for silence. We understand this is inconvenient, but it is necessary for public safety. Food and essential supplies will be provided. Please cooperate with our staff. We will update you as we have more information. With that, she turned and left. Through the hostel's front windows, I watched as workers in protective gear began setting up barriers around the building. Just like that, we were cut off from the outside world. The first day wasn't so bad. There was a sense of camaraderie among us hostelers. We were all in this together. After all, we exchanged contact information for our families back home, played card games, and speculated about how long we'd be stuck here. The hostel staff did their best to keep spirits up, organizing a movie night in the common room. But as days turned into a week, the atmosphere changed. Food deliveries were infrequent and meager. The tiny shared bathrooms became disgusting quickly with so many people using them. Worst of all, we had no idea when this would end. Tensions began to rise. I woke one morning to shouting from the room next door. 2 guys, I think they were German, were screaming at each other over a missing phone charger. Later that day, I saw Emma in tears after getting into an argument with Chin over whose turn it was to use the single working outlet in the common room. By day 10, things were getting desperate. A group of 5 travelers tried to make a break for it, attempting to scale the back fence. They were quickly caught by the guards posted outside and brought back in. After that, the health officials threatened to extend our quarantine if anyone else tried to escape. The worst part was not knowing. We had no idea if we were actually infected or not. Every cough, every sneeze sent ripples of panic through the hostel. People began to isolate themselves in their rooms, eyeing each other with suspicion. I found myself gravitating towards Raj. He had a calm demeanor that I found reassuring in the chaos. We'd take walks around the small courtyard together, talking about anything other than our current situation. He told me about growing up in Mumbai, about his dreams of starting his own tech company someday. I shared stories of my family back in Canada, of the travels I'd planned before all this happened. On day 14, things reached a breaking point. Our food delivery was late, and people were hungry and angry. A fight broke out in the kitchen over the last pack of instant noodles. I watched in horror as it escalated, fists flying and blood spilling on the dirty linoleum floor. That night, huddled on my bunk, I felt a tickle in my throat. Panic seized me. Was this it? Had I caught the virus? I tried to stifle the cough, but it burst out of me like a gunshot in the quiet room. Immediately, the other people in my dorm began shouting, "She's infected. Get her out of here." I tried to explain that it was just a dry throat, that I felt fine, but no one would listen. They forced me out into the hallway, throwing my backpack after me. I slumped against the wall, tears streaming down my face. This couldn't be happening. A gentle hand on my shoulder made me look up. It was Raj. "Come on," he said softly. "You can stay in my room." I have it to myself since my roommate tried to escape last week. I followed him gratefully, ignoring the dirty looks from other guests we passed in the hall. Raj's room was tiny, with just 2 narrow beds and a small window overlooking the street. But in that moment, it felt like a sanctuary. We fell into a routine over the next few days. Raj would go out to get our meager food rations, as I was too afraid to face the others. We'd eat together, play cards, and talk for hours. Despite the awful circumstances, I found myself enjoying his company more than I'd like to admit. On day 21, we were woken by a commotion outside. Peering out the window, we saw the barricades being taken down. A health official with a megaphone was making an announcement. "The quarantine is now lifted. You have all tested negative for the virus. You are free to go." Just like that, it was over. The hostel erupted in cheers and cries of relief. People rushed to pack their things, eager to put this nightmare behind them. But as I shoved my clothes into my backpack, I felt a strange reluctance. I looked over at Raj, who was slowly folding his shirts. "So," I said, trying to sound casual, "what are your plans now?" He shrugged. "I'm not sure. My flight home was weeks ago. I'll have to figure something out." I took a deep breath. I was thinking of heading to Chiang Mai next. I hear it's beautiful this time of year. Raj looked up, a slow smile spreading across his face. I've always wanted to see Chiang Mai. As we walked out of the hostel together into the bright Bangkok sunlight, I realized something. This quarantine, as terrible as it had been, had given me something unexpected. A connection I might never have made otherwise. The busy street was a shock after weeks of confinement. Tuk-tuks and motorcycles whizzed by. Street vendors called out their wares, and the air was thick with the scent of frying food and exhaust. Raj turned to me, his eyes crinkling at the corners as he smiled. "So, where to first?" I grinned back, feeling lighter than I had in weeks. "How about some pad thai? I'm dying for something that's not vacuum-sealed or from a can." As we merged into the flow of pedestrians, I felt a mix of emotions: relief at our freedom, lingering anxiety from our ordeal, and excitement for what lay ahead. The future was uncertain, but for the first time in weeks, that uncertainty felt like an adventure rather than a threat. I glanced back at the hostel one last time. Its windows now stood open, other released travelers spilling out onto the street. For 3 weeks, it had been our prison. But it had also been the place where, in the midst of fear and chaos, I'd found an unexpected friendship, or maybe something more. Raj's hand brushed against mine as we walked, and I felt a little jolt of electricity. Whatever came next, I was glad I wouldn't be facing it alone. Sometimes, it takes being trapped to realize what real freedom means. The old clock in the lobby struck midnight, its chimes echoing through the empty halls. I settled into the creaky chair behind the reception desk, ready for another uneventful night shift. Little did I know, this job would plunge me into a nightmare I never saw coming. My name's Alex, and I've been backpacking through Europe for the past 3 months. Prague was supposed to be my last stop before heading home, but my funds had run desperately low. The starry Mesto hostel had a help wanted sign in the window, offering free accommodation plus a small stipend for a night receptionist. It seemed like the perfect solution to extend my trip a little longer. The job itself was simple enough. Check in any late arrivals, handle any issues that came up during the night, and make sure nobody caused too much trouble. The hostel was an old building, all creaky floorboards and faded wallpaper, but it had character. Plus, the night shift meant I could still explore the city during the day. My first few nights were quiet. I'd read books, chat with the occasional insomniac traveler, and watch the sun rise over the cobblestone streets. But on my fourth night, things started to get weird. It was around 2 a.m. when I heard it. Footsteps coming from the second floor. Slow, deliberate steps that creaked on every other floorboard. I assumed it was just a guest heading to the bathroom, but something about the rhythm felt off. I pulled up the security camera feed on the ancient computer. The hallway was empty. The footsteps continued, getting louder, as if whoever it was were descending the stairs. But the staircase cam showed nothing. A chill ran down my spine. I must be more tired than I thought. I shook my head and turned back to my book, but I couldn't shake the feeling of unease. The next night was worse. Around the same time, I heard those footsteps again. But this time, they were accompanied by a low, mumbling voice. The words were indistinct, but the tone was urgent, almost pleading. I checked the cameras again. Nothing. "Hello," I called out, my voice sounding small in the empty lobby. "Is someone there?" The mumbling stopped abruptly. The silence that followed was somehow even more unsettling. I tried to rationalize it. Old buildings make noises. The pipes, the settling foundation. There were plenty of explanations that didn't involve anything supernatural. Still, I found myself dreading the approach of 2 a.m. for the rest of my shift. On my sixth night, I wasn't alone when it happened. A young Australian couple had checked in late, and the guy, Tim, I think his name was having trouble sleeping. He came down to the lobby to chat. "So, how long have you been working here?" Tim asked, settling into one of the worn armchairs. I glanced at the clock. 1:55 a.m. "About a week," I replied, trying to keep my voice steady. "It's a pretty easy gig, usually." Tim nodded, then frowned. "Usually? Has something unusual happened?" Before I could answer, the footsteps started, loud and clear, coming from right above us. Tim's eyes widened. "What the hell is that?" he whispered. The mumbling voice joined in, more distinct than ever before. It sounded like a man, his words slurred as if he were drunk or very tired. "Please help me. I can't find my way." Tim jumped to his feet. "Is that someone sleepwalking? Should we check on them?" I shook my head, my mouth dry. "There's no one there. Look." I turned the computer monitor so he could see the empty hallway feeds. The color drained from Tim's face. Without another word, he bolted back upstairs. I didn't blame him. The next day, I cornered Magda, the hostel's owner, as she was restocking the vending machine. "Has anyone ever mentioned anything strange happening here at night?" I asked, trying to sound casual. Magda's hand paused, a bag of chips hovering halfway to the shelf. "Strange how?" I told her about the footsteps, the voice, the empty cameras. With each detail, her expression grew more troubled. "I had hoped it would not happen again," she said finally, her accent thicker than usual. "It has been many years." My heart raced. "What has?" Magda sighed, abandoning the vending machine to sit heavily in a nearby chair. "This hostel, it is very old. Many people have passed through. Not all of them left." She went on to tell me a story that chilled me to the bone. In the 1980s, when the building was still a small hotel, a guest had disappeared. A young American, traveling alone. He had checked in one night and never checked out. His belongings were found in his room, but there was no trace of the man himself. The police, they searched everywhere, Magda said, but it was as if he had vanished into thin air. After that, the nighttime disturbances began. Footsteps, voices, always around 2 a.m., always on the second floor. I swallowed hard. Why didn't you tell me this before? Magda shrugged helplessly. It had been quiet for so long. I thought perhaps it was finally over, and it is not easy to find night staff if they know. I understood her reluctance, but it didn't make me feel any better about the situation. That night, I came to work armed with a flashlight, a crucifix I'd bought from a street vendor, despite not being particularly religious, and a determination to get to the bottom of this. As 2 a.m. approached, I found myself holding my breath. The seconds ticked by in agonizing slowness. 2:01, 2:02, 2:03, nothing. I let out a shaky laugh. Maybe it was over. Maybe telling Magda had somehow broken the spell. Then I heard it. Not footsteps this time, but a long, mournful wail that seemed to come from everywhere and nowhere at once. The lights flickered, and for a split second, I swore I saw a figure at the top of the stairs, a young man in outdated clothes, his face a mask of confusion and terror. I blinked, and he was gone. My hands shook as I pulled out my phone, opening a notes app. I began to type, documenting everything I could remember about the apparition. As I did, a thought struck me. What if the ghost wasn't trying to scare us? What if he was trying to tell us something? The next day, instead of sleeping, I headed to the city library. Hours of research yielded a name: Michael Bradbury, 23, from Ohio. He had been backpacking through Europe in 1985 when he disappeared in Prague. The case had gone cold decades ago. Armed with this information, I approached my next shift with a mix of fear and determination. As 2 a.m. neared, I spoke out loud to the empty lobby. Michael? Michael Bradbury? I know who you are. I want to help you. The response was immediate. The temperature dropped, so suddenly I could see my breath. The wailing started again, but this time, I could make out words. Lost. I'm lost. Can't find my way back. Back where, Michael? I asked, my voice shaking. What happened to you? Suddenly, the world seemed to shift. The lobby blurred and reformed, but it wasn't a lobby anymore. I was standing in a small, dark space. A closet, maybe. I could hear muffled voices outside, speaking Czech. A hand grabbed my arm, and I stifled a scream. It was him, Michael. He looked solid, real, his eyes wide with panic. Help me, he pleaded. I was hiding. It was a game, a stupid, drunken game. But the door jammed and I couldn't get out. I called for help, but no one came. I think I'm still in there. The vision faded as quickly as it had come. I found myself back in the lobby, gasping for air. But now I knew where to look. I raced upstairs, not caring about the noise I was making. On the second floor, I started feeling along the walls, looking for any sign of a hidden door. At the end of the hallway, I found it, a section of wallpaper that didn't quite match the rest. My heart pounding, I pried at the edges. With a groan of protesting wood, a narrow door swung open. The smell that wafted out was musty, ancient. And there, curled up in the corner of the tiny space, were the skeletal remains of Michael Bradbury. The next few hours were a blur of police, forensics teams, and questioning. As dawn broke, I watched from the hostel steps as they carried out a body bag. A sense of peace settled over me, like a weight I hadn't known I was carrying had been lifted. Magda joined me, her eyes red from crying. Thank you, she said softly. You have brought him peace. And us. I nodded, too exhausted for words. As the police cars drove away, I saw a figure standing on the corner. Michael, looking young and whole. He smiled at me, lifted his hand in a wave, and faded away into the morning mist. I'd come to Prague looking for adventure, for stories to tell. I never imagined I'd end up solving a decades-old mystery, or that I'd believe in ghosts. But as I finally crawled into bed that morning, I realized that sometimes the most important journeys are the ones we never planned to take. The night shift at Stary Mesto Hostel had changed me forever, and as I drifted off to sleep, I wonder what other secrets this old city might be hiding, waiting for someone to listen to the whispers in the night. The door slid shut with a metallic groan, and my stomach dropped as the elevator lurched upwards. Little did I know, those next few hours trapped in a metal box would push us to the brink of sanity and survival. I'm Zoe, a 28-year-old graphic designer from London, and this was supposed to be my dream solo trip through Eastern Europe. After a whirlwind week in Budapest, I'd arrived in Bucharest, Romania, ready for my next adventure. The old town hostel seemed perfect. Cheap, centrally located, and full of character. Maybe a little too much character, as it turned out. It was close to midnight when I returned from a pub crawl with some fellow travelers. The hostel was housed in a grand old building, all faded elegance and creaky floorboards. The tiny elevator was a relic, with an ornate iron gate you had to close manually before the thing would move. I stumbled in, the world spinning slightly from one too many palinkas, and pressed the button for the 4th floor. Just as the doors began to close, a hand shot through the gap. "Wait up!" a voice called out. The owner of the hand squeezed in, a tall guy with messy brown hair and a scruffy beard. He flashed me a lopsided grin. "Thanks. I'm Ben." "Zoe," I replied, trying not to breathe too much of my alcohol-laced breath in his direction. 2 more people rushed up just then. A couple who looked to be in their early 50s, clearly tourists with their matching fanny packs and sensible shoes. "Oh, good, you held it," the woman exclaimed, slightly out of breath. "I'm Margaret, and this is my husband, Howard." We all exchanged polite nods as Howard pressed a button for the 3rd floor. The elevator creaked ominously as it began its slow ascent. We had just passed the 2nd floor when it happened. There was a loud grinding noise, followed by a sickening lurch. The lights flickered, and for a heart-stopping moment, we were in complete darkness. When they came back on, the elevator was motionless. "What the hell?" Ben muttered, jabbing at the buttons. Nothing happened. Howard reached for the emergency call button, holding it down. We all held our breath, waiting for a response. Silence. "Maybe it's just stuck," Margaret said, a tremor in her voice. "I'm sure someone will notice soon." But as minutes ticked by, it became clear that help wasn't coming anytime soon. The initial amusement of our situation quickly faded into concern, then edged towards panic. I tried to focus on my breathing, fighting against the claustrophobia that threatened to overwhelm me. The elevator couldn't have been more than 6 feet by 4 feet, and with 4 adults crammed inside, personal space was non-existent. Ben started pacing, all 3 steps the small space would allow. "There's got to be a way out of here," he muttered, running his hands through his hair. "Young man, please stop moving," Howard snapped. "You're making the whole thing shake." Ben whirled on him. "Well, at least I'm trying to do something instead of just standing there." "Stop it, both of you," Margaret intervened. "Fighting won't help anything." I closed my eyes, wishing I could block out the rising tensions as easily as I could block out the sight of our tiny prison. The alcohol in my system was not helping matters, making the world spin even though we were standing still. After what felt like hours, but was probably only about 45 minutes, we heard voices outside. Hope surged through me. "Hello? Is anyone out there? We're stuck." I called out, banging on the door. The voices grew closer. A man with a heavy Romanian accent spoke through the door. "Hello? How many people inside?" "4. We all shouted in unison. Okay. We try to open. May take some time. You have water?" "Yes." The realization that we didn't have any supplies hit us all at once. No water, no food, not even a phone charger between us. "No, we don't have anything," Howard replied, his voice tight with worry. "Ah, it's problem," the voice said. "We work fast, okay? Stay calm." As the sound of tools and muffled conversations filtered through the door, we settled in for what was clearly going to be a long wait. At first, we tried to keep our spirits up. We played word games, shared travel stories, anything to distract ourselves from our predicament. But as hours passed with no sign of rescue, the mood in our tiny metal box grew darker. The air was getting stuffy, and sweat beaded on all our foreheads. Margaret had started to hyperventilate, and Howard was doing his best to calm her down. Ben had given up on pacing, and now sat slumped in the corner, his head in his hands. I found myself watching the digital clock on my fitness tracker, the minutes crawling by with excruciating slowness. 2:17 a.m., 2:18 a.m., 2:19 a.m. I can't take this anymore. Ben suddenly exploded, jumping to his feet. He began pounding on the doors, screaming for help. "Stop it!" Howard yelled, grabbing Ben's arm. "You'll use up all our oxygen." Ben shoved him off, his eyes wild. "Get off me, old man. We can't just sit here and die." I stepped between them, holding my hands up. "Both of you, calm down. We're not going to die. They're working on getting us out, remember?" But my words seemed to fall on deaf ears. The two men continued to argue, their voices rising, filling our small space with angry shouts. Margaret had curled into a ball in the corner, her hands over her ears, rocking slightly. The claustrophobia I'd been fighting came rushing back full force. The walls seemed to be closing in, the ceiling lowering. I couldn't breathe. Spots danced in front of my eyes. "Shut up!" I screamed, surprising even myself with the volume and fury in my voice. Silence fell, all eyes turning to me. "Just stop," I continued, my voice shaking. "This isn't helping anyone. We need to work together if we're going to get through this." The fight seemed to drain out of both men. Ben slumped back against the wall, while Howard returned to comforting his wife. I took a deep breath, trying to center myself. "Okay, let's think this through. What resources do we have?" We pooled what we had: a half-empty water bottle Ben had in his pocket, a pack of gum, Howard's diabetes medication, and my fitness tracker. It wasn't much, but it was something. "We need to conserve energy," I said, trying to sound more confident than I felt. "Let's sit down, try to relax. We'll take turns calling for help every 15 minutes. The others nodded, and we arranged ourselves as comfortably as we could in the cramped space. I started a timer on my tracker, and we settled into wait. The next few hours were a blur of discomfort, anxiety, and increasingly desperate attempts to get someone's attention. Our throats grew raw from shouting, and the small amount of water we had was quickly depleted. As dawn broke, painting the sliver of visible hallway with pale light, I felt hope starting to fade. The rescue efforts outside seemed to have gone quiet. Had they given up? Had they forgotten about us? Just as despair threatened to overwhelm me, there was a loud clang from above. We all looked up to see the emergency hatch on the ceiling being pried open. A face appeared in the opening, a firefighter, his expression grim but determined. "We're going to get you out," he called down. "One at a time. Who's first?" Margaret was in the worst shape, so we insisted she go first. Howard followed, then Ben. As they lifted me out last, my legs buckled, weak from hours of limited movement. The hallway was full of emergency personnel, hostile staff, and curious onlookers. Someone handed me a bottle of water, which I gulped down gratefully. As the adrenaline faded, I was hit with a wave of exhaustion, but underneath that was a profound sense of relief and, surprisingly, connection. I looked at my fellow survivors. We had been strangers just hours ago, and now we shared a bond forged in fear and perseverance. Ben caught my eye and gave me a tired smile. "Some adventure, huh?" I couldn't help but laugh. "Yeah, not quite what I had in mind when I booked this trip." As we were led downstairs for medical checkups, I found myself reflecting on the experience. Travel is supposed to push you out of your comfort zone, to test your limits. Well, mission accomplished, Bucharest. Later, as I sat in a cafe across from the hostel, sipping the strongest coffee I could order and watching the morning bustle of the city, I felt different, stronger somehow. If I could survive a night trapped in an elevator with 3 strangers, what couldn't I handle? I pulled out my journal and began to write. This was a story I'd be telling for years to come. A reminder that sometimes the most memorable travel experiences are the ones you never saw coming. And that even in the darkest, most confined spaces, human resilience and connection can flourish. As I wrote, I made a mental note. Next time, take the stairs. I first saw her in the bathroom mirror, a fleeting glimpse that made my heart stop. She had my face, my hair, even the small scar above my left eyebrow. But I was alone in the hostel bathroom, staring at my own wide-eyed reflection. That's when I realized my Prague adventure was about to take a terrifying turn. My name is Mia, and I've been backpacking through Europe for the past 2 months. Prague was meant to be a highlight, all Gothic spires and cobblestone streets straight out of a fairy tale. The Charles Bridge hostel seemed perfect. Cheap, centrally located, and full of fellow travelers. I checked in that afternoon, looking forward to a few days of exploring the city. After a long day of sightseeing, I'd headed to the communal bathroom to freshen up before joining some hostel mates for dinner. That's when I saw her, or me, or whatever it was, just for a second, as I was washing my hands. I whirled around, but the bathroom was empty. Shaking my head, I chalked it up to travel fatigue and too much Czech beer with lunch. At dinner, I tried to push the incident out of my mind. I was sitting with a fun group. There was Emma from Australia, Sven from Sweden, and a brother-sister duo from Canada, Alex and Jess. We were swapping travel stories over heaping plates of goulash when Emma said something that made my blood run cold. "Hey, Mia, I think I saw your twin earlier. She looked just like you. It was uncanny." I waved, but I guess she didn't see me. I nearly choked on my beer. "What? When was this?" Emma furrowed her brow, thinking, "Oh, maybe an hour ago?" She was heading out the front door as I was coming in. "But that's impossible," I said, my voice shaky. I was in my room then, taking a nap. The table fell silent, everyone exchanging uneasy glances. "Maybe you have a doppelganger," Sven joked, trying to lighten the mood. "They say everyone has one somewhere in the world." I forced a laugh, but inside, my mind was racing. First the mirror, now this? What was going on? The next morning, I woke early, determined to shake off the weirdness of the previous day. I headed to the hostel's small kitchen to make some coffee. As I rounded the corner, I saw her. She was standing at the counter, her back to me, wearing the exact same outfit I had on, right down to the scuffed red Converse sneakers. My breath caught in my throat. Slowly, she turned around. It was like looking in a mirror, but one that moved independently of me. We stared at each other, identical expressions of shock on our faces. Then she bolted, pushing past me and disappearing down the hallway. I stood frozen for a moment before chasing after her. But when I reached the corridor, it was empty. My heart was pounding so hard I could hear it in my ears. This couldn't be happening. I had to be losing my mind. Throughout the day, reports of sightings trickled in. Jess swore she'd seen me in 2 places at once. Leaving the hostel, as I was sitting in the common room, Alex said he'd waved at me on the street, but I'd ignored him completely. At a time when I knew I'd been in the shower, I was terrified but also determined to get to the bottom of this. That night, I decided to set a trap. I told everyone I was turning in early, then sneaked down to the dimly lit common room and hid behind a large potted plant. I had a clear view of the room, but was mostly concealed. Hours passed. My legs cramped, and I was fighting to stay awake when I heard footsteps. I held my breath as a figure entered the room. It was her, me, my doppelganger. She moved with eerie familiarity, going straight to where I'd left my guidebook earlier. She picked it up, flipping through the pages as if looking for something. In the faint light, I could see every detail matched. The small mole on her neck, the chipped nail polish on her left hand. Gathering all my courage, I stepped out from my hiding place. "Who are you?" I demanded, my voice shaking. She spun around, the book falling from her hands. For a long moment, we just stared at each other. Then she spoke, her voice identical to mine. "I'm you," she said simply. "Or rather, you're me. I'm not sure anymore." I shook my head, backing away. "That's impossible. You can't be me." "I'm me." She took a step closer, her expression a mix of sadness and frustration. "I know how this sounds. I wouldn't believe it either, but we're the same person, Mia. Somehow, we've been split." My mind reeled. This couldn't be real. "If that's true," I said slowly, "then tell me something only I would know." Without hesitation, she replied, "When we were 8, we broke Mom's favorite vase. We blamed it on the cat and felt guilty for years. We've never told anyone." I felt the blood drain from my face. No one else could know that. My knees felt weak, and I sank onto the nearby couch. "How is this possible?" I whispered. She sat down next to me, and I fought the urge to flinch away. "I don't know," she said. "I woke up 2 days ago in a hostel across town, confused and scared. I came here because I knew I was staying here. It was like having 2 sets of memories. But why haven't we run into each other before now?" I asked. She shrugged. "I've been avoiding you, us. I was afraid of what would happen if we came face to face. But I couldn't stay away. I needed to understand." We talked for hours, comparing memories, trying to pinpoint where our timelines diverged. Everything was identical up until our arrival in Prague. Somehow, in this ancient city of magic and mysteries, the impossible had happened. As dawn broke, we were no closer to understanding the how or why, but we'd formed a tentative plan. We couldn't both be Mia. It would raise too many questions, risk too much attention. One of us had to leave Prague. "I'll go," my doppelganger said. "You checked in here, you've made friends. It'll be easier for you to continue as if nothing happened." I felt a strange mix of relief and sadness. "Where will you go?" "I'm not sure," she replied, "but the world's a big place. There's room for both of us, as long as we're not in the same place." We hugged goodbye, and it was the strangest sensation, like embracing myself, but also like saying farewell to a twin I never knew I had. As she walked out of the hostel, I watched from the window, an odd ache in my chest. The next few days passed in a blur. I tried to act normal around the other hostel guests, but I could tell they sensed something was off. Emma kept giving me worried looks, and Sven asked more than once if I was feeling okay. I threw myself into exploring Prague, trying to lose myself in the beauty of the city. I climbed to the top of the astronomical clock tower, wandered through the Jewish quarter, and spent hours in the St. Vitus Cathedral, staring up at the vaulted ceilings and intricate stained glass. But everywhere I went, I found myself looking for her, for me. Every reflection, every crowded street corner held the possibility of another encounter. I jumped at shadows and did double takes at strangers who bore even a passing resemblance to me. On my last night in Prague, I stood on the Charles Bridge at sunset, watching the sky turn pink and gold over the Vltava River. A sense of melancholy washed over me. I'd come to Prague looking for adventure, for experiences that would change me. Well, mission accomplished, I thought wryly. As I turned to head back to the hostel, a flyer caught my eye. It was for a small museum of the paranormal, featuring exhibits on doppelgangers and parallel universes. I couldn't help but laugh at the irony. Back in my room, I sat down to write in my travel journal. How could I possibly capture what had happened? In the end, I simply wrote, "In Prague, I found myself, literally. The city of 100 spires showed me that reality is stranger and more wonderful than we can imagine." As I packed my bag, preparing to move on to my next destination, I found a note tucked into the front pocket of my backpack. The handwriting was my own. "Mia, our paths may never cross again, but know that you're not alone. Wherever I am, a part of you is out there living, exploring, experiencing. Make our life an adventure worth living twice." Your other you. I folded the note carefully and tucked it into my journal. Whatever had happened in Prague, whether it was a miracle, a glitch in the universe, or just an elaborate hallucination, I knew I'd never be the same. The next morning, as my train pulled away from Prague's main station, I looked out at the receding spires of the city. Somewhere out there, another me was starting her own new adventure. I smiled, feeling a strange sense of peace. The world suddenly seemed bigger, full of infinite possibilities, and I was ready to explore them all twice over. The moment the lights went out, I knew this wasn't going to be your average power outage. The darkness that engulfed our crowded hostel brought with it a sinister silence, broken only by the sound of my own ragged breathing. Little did I know, the next few hours would push us to the brink of paranoia and reveal the darkest sides of human nature. I'm Jake, a 25-year-old software developer from Seattle, and this was supposed to be my dream vacation in Tokyo. After years of saving up, I'd finally made it to the bustling metropolis I'd only ever seen in movies and anime. The Shibuya Skyline Hostel seemed perfect, affordable, centrally located, and filled with fellow travelers from around the world. It was my third night there when everything went sideways. I just returned from a late-night ramen run. The warm glow of neon signs still dancing behind my eyelids as I climbed the stairs to the fourth floor. The hallway lights flickered once, twice, and then darkness. At first, there was nervous laughter from the rooms around me. Power outages happen, right? No big deal. I fumbled for my phone, using its dim light to guide me back to my shared room. Inside, I found my roommates, Liam from Ireland, Yuki from Osaka, and Maria from Brazil, already gathering flashlights and candles. Citywide blackout, apparently, Liam said, his face ghostly in the candlelight. The hostel staff is checking the circuit breakers, but it might be a while. We settled in for what we thought would be a short wait, swapping travel stories and enjoying the cozy atmosphere. But as minutes stretched into hours, an uneasy feeling began to creep over me. Something about this didn't feel right. A commotion in the hallway drew us out of our room. Other guests were gathered around the stairwell, their faces a mix of confusion and growing concern. "The doors are locked," someone said, their voice tight with panic. "We can't get out." My heart rate picked up. "What do you mean locked?" An older man, probably in his 60s, spoke up. "The fire doors at the bottom of the stairwell. They're electronic, with no power." "We're trapped," Maria finished, her eyes wide. The realization hit us all at once. We were stuck on the upper floors of the hostel, in the dark, with no way out. Panic began to ripple through the crowd. "Has anyone tried calling for help?" I asked, already pulling out my phone. No signal. "Of course. The landlines are dead too," Yuki added quietly. "And there's no Wi-Fi." As the night wore on, the initial camaraderie of a shared, unusual experience began to fray. People separated into groups, hoarding what few supplies they had. Whispers started. What if this wasn't an accident? What if someone in the hostel was responsible? I tried to keep a level head, organizing an inventory of our resources. We had some snacks, a few bottles of water, and an assortment of power banks to keep our phones alive. For all the good they did us with no signal. But it wasn't enough. Not nearly enough if we were stuck here for days. Around 3 a.m., the first scream pierced the darkness. It came from the room next to ours, a shrill sound of terror that set my nerves on edge. We rushed over to find a young woman, tears streaming down her face. "My necklace," she sobbed. "It's gone. Someone was in here while I was sleeping." I felt hands on my neck. Accusations flew. Everyone eyed each other with suspicion. Who among us was a thief? The mood shifted from uneasy to downright hostile. I retreated to my room, mind racing. This was getting out of hand. We needed to stay calm, to work together. But how could we, when trust had been shattered? A soft knock on the door made me jump. It was Maria, her usually cheerful face drawn with worry. Jake, she whispered, I think I saw something, or someone, a shadow, moving at the end of the hall. But when I called out, it disappeared. I wanted to reassure her, to say it was just her imagination, but the prickle of fear at the base of my spine told me otherwise. Something was very, very wrong here. As dawn approached, bringing no light to our darkened prison, tensions reached a breaking point. Food and water were running low. People were scared, angry, and desperate. That's when the fighting started. It began as a shouting match between two guys arguing over a power bank. Pushes turned to shoves, and suddenly fists were flying. In the chaos, I heard a sickening crunch and a cry of pain. Someone was hurt. I pushed my way through the crowd, using my phone's flashlight to assess the damage. One of the men was on the ground, blood streaming from his nose. The other stood over him, chest heaving, eyes wild. "Stop!" I yelled, surprised by the authority in my own voice. "This isn't helping anyone. We need to work together if we're going to get out of this." For a moment, it seemed like my words had gotten through. Then I heard it, a low chuckle from the back of the crowd. A figure stepped forward, and my blood ran cold. It was the night manager, a man I'd barely noticed before. But now, in the eerie glow of our collective flashlights, he looked different, dangerous. "Work together?" he sneered. "Oh, that's rich. You're not getting out of here. None of you are." The silence that followed was deafening. Then chaos erupted. People screamed, pushing and shoving to get away from the man. In the commotion, I saw him slip something from his pocket, a key card. Without thinking, I lunged for him. We grappled in the darkness, my hands desperately searching for that key. I felt it brush my fingers just as a blinding pain exploded in my side. He'd pulled a knife. I staggered back, warm blood seeping through my shirt. The manager made a break for the stairwell. Through the haze of pain, one thought crystallized. I couldn't let him get away. "Stop him," I yelled, my voice hoarse. To my amazement, the crowd responded. As one, we surged forward. The manager was fast, but he couldn't outrun all of us. Liam tackled him just as he reached the fire door. The key card skittered across the floor. Yuki snatched it up, her hands shaking as she swiped it through the reader. For a heart-stopping moment, nothing happened. Then, with a soft beep, the door unlocked. Fresh air and pale morning light flooded the stairwell. We were free. The next few hours passed in a blur of police sirens, paramedic visits, and endless questions. The full story came out in bits and pieces. The night manager had planned it all, the power outage, the locked doors. He'd hoped to rob us all and slip away in the confusion. As I sat on the back of an ambulance, wincing as a paramedic bandaged my side, I looked at the faces of my fellow hostelers. We were strangers from all corners of the world, thrown together by chance and circumstance. In those dark hours, we'd seen the worst of each other. Fear, suspicion, violence. But in the end, we'd also seen the best, courage, unity, and the will to survive. Liam caught my eye and gave me a tired smile. "Some vacation, huh?" I couldn't help but laugh, even though it made my injury throb. "Yeah, not quite what I had in mind when I booked this trip." As the sun rose fully over Tokyo, painting the sky in shades of pink and gold, I felt a strange mix of exhaustion and exhilaration. I'd come to Japan seeking adventure, looking to step out of my comfort zone. Well, mission accomplished. In the days that followed, as we gave statements to the police and began to process what had happened, something unexpected occurred. The bonds forged in those terrifying hours didn't break. We'd been through something extraordinary together, and it had changed us all. We created a group chat, vowing to stay in touch. There was talk of reunions, of meeting up in other parts of the world. The darkness had brought us together, but it was the light of human connection that would keep us linked. As I boarded my flight home a week later, my side still tender but healing, I found myself smiling. My Tokyo adventure hadn't gone according to plan, but it had given me something far more valuable than sightseeing and souvenir photos. It had shown me the strength I never knew I had, and the incredible things that can happen when strangers become allies in the face of adversity. I settled into my seat, closed my eyes, and let out a long breath. Whatever adventures lay ahead, I knew I was ready for them. After all, what could be scarier than a night in the dark with a hostel full of strangers? As the plane took off, carrying me away from Tokyo, I made a mental note. Next time, maybe I'll splurge for a hotel with a backup generator.